Documentation and standardization is critically important. And today we're going to be talking about how to build some of these standards within your business, because in order for you to scale your business up, you're going to need to iron some of these processes out. When you're just starting out in your business, it's really easy just to kind of go from the issue of the day to the next issue of the day, and you're just kind of repeatedly kind of going through those things, and it makes it really hard to write things down. And so we're going to be talking about some of these core critical pieces to write down and standards to set within your business. Now, I'm not talking about technology stack and those kinds of things. Yes, those are important, and we'll get to that in a future ramble. But the thing that I am the most concerned about, or want to convey the most, is that the processes that build out some of the core things that you do are really important. And so the things I'm thinking about today are things like documentation of your client networks, documentation of your own situation, your own networks, and those kinds of things, and just kind of documenting the standards of how you're going to operate, because I think that's really important. Now, when you think about your own documentation and client documentation, that's really sort of the same thing to a large degree. I think that you need to spend some time on your client documentation, because that's really important to do that really well. And when you do that really well, it allows you to swap out support team members as people grow or as the team turns over, because it's going to do some of that. Let's talk about some ideas about how to do that today. One of the problems I used to see all the time, and I see it with my peer group members these days, is you've got documentation in your PSA, and you got some documentation in SharePoint or some files or whatever, and maybe you've got some documentation that's in a documentation tool like a IT Glue or Hoodoo or something like that. And what seems to happen is when you have things spread out amongst all these different tools, what technicians like to do is they say, well, gee, I didn't know where the documentation was. I went and looked, I didn't see it where I thought it was supposed to be, and so I just kind of did my own thing. But that's hard to scale that, right? Scaling an organization when the techs can kind of go, whenever they feel like it, is not really an organization that's built to scale. So a couple things. Thing one, make sure your documentation's in the same spot. I actually like for you to have all of your internal and external documentation in the same spot. Thing two, make it really easy to find. Have standards for how you document things, where things live, all of that stuff, and continually work on it. Now, I think that there's also a challenge with trying to document too many things, or not being sure what to document, right? You could document every little thing and have a million different things, pieces of documentation, and then it's just really hard to keep that up to date. Or you document like just a few things, the high level stuff, and then your lower level techs struggle, right? And so I'm a fan of kind of splitting this up into a couple different methods. The first method is really kind of this universal standard of, for your lowest level techs, your tier ones, have a number of things that they can work on, right? And have a very discrete, like, core set of tasks that you ask them to do, and really kind of roll them through that, right? You say, all right, for the very first couple weeks, all you're doing is password resets and some triage, right? And you teach them the triage side and just do password resets. Then after you do password resets, if you can kind of graduate to the next thing, you layer on things like user creation and group creation and those kinds of things, right? You build these layers, and you only let them move from one layer to the next layer to the next layer once they've proven that they've been able to master what they're working on. That's, for me, is a really important thing. So what you do is you document all of those pieces, and you do it really, really well. You document all the different steps for those things. And then you standardize, the tools and the platforms that you use as best as you can, so that way a brand new level 1 tech can service all of your clients with the most basic of things, right? That's the important part. And then as they grow as a technician, you move them up. That, for me, was a really valuable thing that we did in my former company. The second layer of all of this, right? The second method in this kind of 3-method plan that I think it makes sense is the whole idea about what does it mean for your client to be up, right? Do they need to have their network online? Do they need to have internet? Do they need to have a line of business app? Do they need to have a cloud app? Like, what does that look like? What are the things that means that the client is up and able to function, right? When you onboard a client, you want to learn these things as quickly as you possibly can and spend the time documenting those things. Because when you do that well and a client has an issue, they will very likely have fewer major issues, and you'll be able to solve these big problems. If you document and have a core idea about what means that client to be up, document the heck out of that. And then not only do you want to document the different pieces of it, right, all the different components, but you want to document, like, what does it mean? Like, there's actually one core document that kind of links to your other documents that says, this is what it means for this client to be up and running, right? I think that's a really important thing to do. The third method is really all about kind of catching the few other things that are important, but maybe not super critical, right? right? Or the kind of the weird nuanced things, the label printer that does this thing that they use on occasion, but it's not critically important. And, you know, if it takes you a little bit longer to figure it out, fine. But the next time you work on it, you've learned some stuff about it, right? It's kind of the other stuff. It's that catch-all things. But the idea is that you don't need to document every little single thing in the entire network all the way down to the nth degree, because it's going to get outdated pretty quickly if you have just all the documents out there, period, right? So if you take care of your clients by having your level ones have a very firm understanding about what's going on and how to support the clients overall, then you document that you understand what it means for that client to be up and functional, and then you have all the little nuanced documentation on top of that. I think that's a really good way of doing that for your clients. Now, when it comes to your internal processes, I think it's important that, again, if you look back at my processes video, and I'll throw the link up above, but that internal processes video is really important too, right? This is your life of a ticket and your sales process and all those things. I think all of those things should be in your documentation as well. But one of the things that you should do as it relates to building out that documentation library is have a standardized way of documenting things, right? You want to make sure that those documents outline the same kind of things, so that way it's a consistent way of kind of seeing all that stuff, right? It's basically a document for how to document. Seems a little silly, seems a little bit circular, but I think it's an important thing to be mindful of. So all of this leads to sort of this third standard, right? Again, we're not talking about stacks. We're talking about kind of process standardization as best as you can. Have a pretty solid set of standards, so that way you don't have to remember that one client A uses OneDrive and client B uses Dropbox. The more you can standardize the how you do things, right? How you map printers, how you access files, how you do remote access, all of that stuff, the more you can standardize all of those things, the easier it is to support a greater number of clients, right? And as managed service providers, it's really important that you standardize as much of that as you possibly can. It's really, really hard to support, 50 different clients with 35 different ways of doing things, right? You don't want to have 15 different backup products. You don't want to have 15 different ways to access files. You don't want to have 15 ways that you manage printers or map printers and those kinds of things, because it's just representatively harder to support. You can't offload a lot of that stuff on more junior engineers. And the last thing you want to do is have a level 3 or one of your more advanced engineers having to be involved in every little printer issue or every little user creation issue, because there's just 75 different ways of doing the thing, right? That's the idea, is that you want to standardize as much of that as possible. The last thing I want to talk about with this ramble is trying to tie all this together, right? The whole point of trying to get the documentation dialed in and trying to kind of build these standards makes it easier for you to support your clients. That's the whole point of being an MSP. That's the whole point of having this managed services, all-you-can-eat type of offering, is to allow you to make it easy to support the basics of all of these different networks. I think when you do that well, you are in a much better spot to be profitable on all those things. With this video, we talked a lot about documentation of your client networks, your internal documentation around things, and standardizing just sort of how you do stuff with your clients. Like, I think it's important to kind of set some of these standards up early, and frankly, as early as you possibly can, because as you start hiring people, you want them to be able to kind of plug right in and not have to invent this training as you go, because it's really hard to build training. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes deliberate action on your part. And the earlier you can do pieces of it, the easier your job becomes as a business owner and as a business leader. Before we close up today, I would love it if you would do me a favor and click on like, click subscribe. All that stuff really helps me on the YouTube side of the world, and I really appreciate you being here. So thanks for coming on this ramble with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.